Welcome to our newest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today we'll be discussing the matching process and also touch on how people feel or how people can navigate the internship year, which is a very hard year for all trainees to start navigating. And today we have a special guest, actually, Dr. Sarah Al-Halabi, who is a very active, actually, we can say trainee. She graduated her medical school from the American University of Beirut Medical Center, and she did a year in the Department of Ethics at UB. Afterwards, she's also a poet, she's a writer, and she actually did a master's at the Department of Narrative Medicine at Columbia University in New York City. She has been through the matching process and has written extensively about it, given the fact that she's a writer. And she's also writing about her internship process at this point. And currently she's an intern at the Westchester Medical Center, close to New York City. Welcome, Sarah, to the podcast.
Thank you, Khalid, for having me.
And just to tell the viewers and the listeners that we are recording this podcast today on August 4, 2021. And therefore, we would like to observe a moment of silence for the victims of the Beirut blast before we start the podcast. So Sarah, I think, this was a big day. I think you were there at the time it happened, right?
I was actually not in Beirut at the time, and I cannot speak to the experiences of the people who were there beyond, through storytelling, if you want to say. Right. I just feel that this blast has had a very demoralizing and generally traumatic effect on all of us. Of course, to some people who were in the physical immediacy of it more so, but today was a very, very difficult day.
Right. I was in Beirut at the time. I had not left the country yet, and I can attest to the impact that day has had on me. But let's focus on the positives, I think, and hopefully things will get better soon in Lebanon, and hopefully we will be able to move ahead and find out why it happened. And also help the country, because I think this will be very important to help the country move forward. We need to know what caused this so people can get over this, at least, or get over part of this and know that there has been accountability and then move forward afterwards.
Yeah, Khalid, it dawns upon me, I was just thinking as I was walking home this afternoon that, I'm in the process of becoming a mental health practitioner. And so much of mental health is constructed outside psychiatry and outside psychology and outside social work and all of these active fields, because so much of what stresses people and makes their life difficult is not controlled by us. And therefore, justice dawns upon me as a crucial element of mental health and mental welfare. People cannot thrive, cannot feel like they're respected as human beings if they do not feel like they are heard. So
right, I agree 100%. And I think we're going to start now, but since we're doing a podcast today, I've listened, and I think everybody should listen to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. Actually, they had a very good episode this week about the blast and its causes. And actually, they delve into the Human Rights Watch report on the whole process and how corruption was involved in this. And I think it's a must listen for a lot of people this week. So I'm going to ask you now, we're going to get into the match process itself. And it's a big process, right? Like, and don't remind me of those days, but so, you go through the match, you decide, okay, I'm going to go through the match. How do you navigate that? Like, how do you start? Where do you start?
Beautiful question, Khalid. Allow me just first to clarify that I have tweeted about the match, but I don't have a booklet. I don't have a poem about the match, but it's a thought process. So I've thought extensively about the match and written in the form of tweets and about intern year, which we will get to. So yeah, it was particularly overwhelming, and I think it's not possible to talk about the match without talking about myself as a person first, because we each come to the match with an identity, right? With stuff that's going on in our lives. So at the time I was a student at Columbia, I was switching from an F1 to an F1 OPT, which is an optional practical training to extend my stay on the student visa. And the Beirut blast had happened when I was applying. I was doing my steps while in grad school, and it was a big, COVID. So everything was really piling up. And then, we had the announcement that it would be the first virtual match, which I think adds a very particular nuance, and we'll talk about that if you'd like. But the biggest advice that I'd have from the get-go is a two-part advice. First of all, be strategic. So it would be very helpful for you to partner up with someone who's already been through the match. And I think people in this cycle have that extra privilege because we've been through that virtual match. So it's not like things are happening the very first time in a virtual world. So that's a plus. So partner up with someone who knows the steps to save you time. But also just take it day by day, because I found myself in the early days of the match really trying to project forward with the organization, but it stressed me out. And so I decided I'm going to take it one day at a time, one interview at a time. And I think that's very crucial.
Yep, I agree with that. I think you have to be strategic. Otherwise, you would get overwhelmed very quickly if you don't do that. And then how do you decide? I mean, you want to apply for psychiatry, right? And you go in, there's like a million programs to apply to. How do you decide which programs you want to apply to? Because at the end of the day, I mean, the more you apply, probably the more interviews you're going to get, maybe, and the higher your chance of matching. At the same time, you're paying massive amounts of money, which may be counterproductive for you in that case.
Yeah, again, a very wonderful question, Khalil. So I think there is a tipping point at which applying more is actually applying less, because it doesn't have any proper backflow to you, if that's even the right word. So I think, first of all, it just will boil down, not to sound very cheesy, but it will really boil down to individual preferences. Some people will say to you, there is no way that I want to live on this part of the country for whatever reason, because maybe it's too far from family, or they just don't want to live there. So first of all, I would say no if you're a geographic location kind of person before you start eliminating other factors, because that's an easy way to cut down the number of programs you want to apply to. And if you don't have a geographical preference, the second piece of advice I would say is, okay, find programs that are IMG friendly. Now, how do you do that? It's not like there's a registry that says, oh, these programs are IMG friendly, right? And it's very specialty dependent. Psych is becoming more competitive for IMGs, right? Other specialties are more IMG friendly. So I can't speak to all specialties, but having said that, what I did was that I went to FRIDA, which is the residency navigation tool. And I went through the filters. So I looked at the programs that offer visas, because some programs will not offer visas. And then I compared that to ERAS. So I took the list of programs, I had them out like on an Excel sheet, and I looked at them up through ERAS to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And I went and I did the opposite. That, of course, having said that, is very time extensive and not very helpful if you're the one doing it. But if someone has already done it in the previous cycle, or you're partnering up with a buddy, that will make your life much easier. You could split according to state or whatever. And then when I went on doing is saying, okay, maybe I don't want to apply to these places. Maybe for personal reasons that it's too far, or that I prefer living on the East Coast. I was already in the East Coast at the time, and I kind of narrowed down. I will be honest and say I might have applied to a bit more programs than I would have liked to, because it was the first virtual cycle, and I wasn't very comfortable sticking to like 50 programs or 60 programs. So I did apply to a bit more than that. But I don't think it made a big difference. So every person will tell you, yeah, we applied to 60, yeah, we applied to 70. And it's an unfortunate thing, and I have to put it out there, that the number of programs per person applied to have increased over time, and not to any significant benefit. So this is a national problem here that I don't necessarily have the answer to.
Right, and I think it may also be due to the fact that it's getting harder for IMGs to match in the US due to the increased number of US medical students. So maybe IMGs are starting to apply to more programs just to increase their matching abilities, I guess. Uh, and when you apply, do you focus, let's say, I want to apply to just university programs, just community programs, or should people apply to a combination of both programs, I guess, to get their bid to be better?
Great question. So it really depends on your preference. I know some friends who applied to psychiatry before who would really, really want university programs. And I know some people who applied to both. I, in fact, was part of the people who applied to both. I wasn't necessarily too hung up on applying to a university program, but let me tell you this, the majority of my interviews have been with university program affiliated hospitals that I got some community affiliated hospitals with a distant university collaboration, but I got a big chunk of university hospitals. And I also got a big chunk of public universities that engaged in something called public psychiatry, which is basically where visits are covered, and the ER is a very big ER, an open ER. And that's not a very accurate definition of public psychiatry, I'm sure, but the bottom line is that they would cover a lot of patients' visits. So people would walk in from every walk of life. I got a lot of those places as well. So there will be a profile that you get if you're applying to psychiatry, just because some states have more IMGs, and some places historically are more used to accepting IMGs.
Right. And I think that's one focus people should focus on, is if you know programs that take IMGs or states that are more IMG friendly, then you should focus on applying to those, because then you maximize your chances of matching. I mean, sometimes some states or some programs who never take IMGs, maybe you should not apply to them because you're going to be paying money for no reason in that case. And that question comes up a lot, I think. And one more question I'm going to say two more questions before we move into the internship process. One is, I mean, we're not going to delve too much into the interview process, but I think this year probably was different because of virtual interviews. So what was your experience with virtual interviews? Because they also seem to be what's going to happen next year. I think a lot of them are going to be virtual interviews. So what was your experience with those? And do you think of them positively or negatively, and why?
So I think a good strategy when a change happens, like a big change, like, virtual interview season, is to always try to think of it as a positive change. Because you really don't have any options, right? I mean, it's going to be a virtual interview season. So you might as well try to look at the things that you can take from it. And having said that, I felt like I really enjoyed the virtual interview season. There's a lot of convenience. So I'm going to be honest, being Lebanese at the time, I was broke. So I didn't have that much money to spend on a lot of things. So travel expenses were cut. So that was a beautiful thing. I could arrange interviews, not necessarily all in the same couple of days. So I had more flexibility. And really simply, I could just show up from my regular working desk, and take like a 15-minute break and start the interview, which is very convenient, right? And you're in the comfort of your own house, which I think is a stress reduction technique in itself. And I had wonderful discussions, regardless of the programs I interviewed with. I just had a lot of great discussions, and I feel when you bring your best self to the table, your best and true self to the table, you will be met with the same.
Right. And do you think you were able to get a good idea about the programs via virtual interviews, or do you think you could have gotten a better idea if you were there in person?
It's hard to say, because I've never done a residency interview that was in person. I've done other kinds of interviews in person, but I will say that the program that I matched into, that I am very happy I matched into, I was pretty much right on the vibes I think that I got on interview day, and I'm happy here. So if that helps.
Excellent. Yeah. I think you mentioning the cost cutting of not traveling and stuff is very important, because I still recall one day when I was interviewing for my fellowship, actually, and I got to the University of Virginia. I remember I did the interview, went to at my time, I'm older than you, much older, I guess, and at the time you had to pay taxis cash to go to the airport. So I went to draw cash from the ATM, and just to find out that I did not have any money. So I had to scramble. I found like a check in my pocket, and so I paid a check, and then I had to pay, of course, a penalty for it afterwards. But I mean, this is what we deal with when you're in residency or medical school. You don't have the money to do all these interviews. So my next question for you is, after you've done your interviews, like, how do you decide on the ranking process? Like, what what makes you rank a program 1, 2, 3? Is it the vibes that you get from it? Is it other factors that weigh into this?
So I'm a poet and writer, which means a lot of my not life decisions, that's a big statement, but many of my small daily decisions rely on how I feel about a situation. But I think it's very important, right? Because that's just insight into emotion, is also insight into thought, is insight into what could push you to do a certain behavior or not, right? What we like, what we dislike. So honestly, even if you're the kind of person who's, a checklist person who has pluses and minuses, like in a neat table, my advice for you would still be go with your feelings and don't overthink it. Like, don't sit for a week trying to convince yourself that you like a program. If you don't like a program, even if they're the best program, you don't like the program. There's something there that is going to translate into discomfort for you personally, not because the program is not great. So I honestly went by vibes, the places that I liked the most, that I felt I could thrive, that I felt where I would be supported, and where I could imagine myself. I ranked top 5.
Right. So I think the advice that you give is to a certain extent follow your instincts and the vibes that you get. I mean, of course, you need to use your mind, right? But like a lot of major decisions in life, I think your instinct is key in these things, and focus on which program that you like the most, not necessarily what program is ranked the highest, because you might not be happy in that program, basically. Yeah. So if you, for example, if you go to a interview in a research heavy program and you're a person who is not that much into, let's say, basic science research, you're not going to be happy if you match in that program. So you don't have to make it work and match there if that's not what you want to. So you did the ranking, you matched. I'm not going to ask you what
I matched into a place I really like, and
exactly,
and would have been very happy to match into and wanted to match into. So that's enough information.
Right, and that's the most important thing, I think, is that you match into a place that you're comfortable matching into. And then you got into internship, I guess. So what were your feelings before you started the internship? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of like feelings that arise before you start.
Disbelief, first of all. So I'll just like say this like funny thing. I would like text my friends, or like when my parents called, I would say, can you believe I'm gonna be an intern? Almost. Yeah, it took some time to convince myself, but when you start, get into the action of it, you're like, yeah, of course I'm the intern. I have to put orders. I'm the intern. And it's a growth process, right? Because the mentality of a medical student, and particularly if you're an IMG, of course, we went to a wonderful school. You and I both, I think, Willie went to the American University and it's a wonderful school. But the culture and training of every institution is different, and also the presentation and the understanding of what a medical student should be doing and what an intern should be doing is vastly different. So there's this growth not only in knowledge base or an attitude, but also in the way you think and the way that you are. And it's not an easy growth, but it's a growth that's full of joy. So I would really advise you just like to go with the flow of what's happening. And I know, sometimes in medical culture, it's easy for us to be hard on ourselves and say, you should have done this and you should have done that. But I'll tell you, it doesn't do much. So just go with the flow and be proactive and just, learn.
Yep. And so did you do any preparations before? Like where did you start like opening
your books? Yes, I did one big preparation, which was vacation.
And so once you started, like, how was your first day? How was day one?
It was lovely. I got a lot of support from my program. The chiefs in our program, I will say this, are stellar individuals, and they really supported us. The program director, I respect a lot and admire. So I was very happy to be working with them all. Everyone's very nice and helpful. So I didn't really have a big pain in transitioning. I felt comfortable saying, listen, I don't know. And I like to teach as well. So Westchester Medical Center is one of the main hospitals for New York Medical College. So we get medical students on our wards. And I found that was sort of a stimulus for me to say to myself, hey, I have people here that I need to help beyond my, of course, patients, that's a given, right? You want to help patients, but when you feel like in your immediate surroundings, you're no longer the medical student and there's someone out there who is the medical student, I think you feel responsible in a way that brings you joy, again, to use that word. So it pushed me to want to be a better intern.
Yep. And so how are the work hours? Like, are you doing an 80-hour work week? Are you doing a 40-hour work week?
So in my program, we're our class of 10 interns. So which ultimately translates into I have something around 2 short calls, which is after you finish your working day at 4:30 or 5, you go to the ER and stay till 9 to see psych emergency folks, and a long call, which would be a 12-hour shift on the weekend. But that's, of course, a regular psych shift. I'm not talking about internal medicine, neurology, and I'm not talking about night floats or swing shifts, which would involve coming in later in the day, and that's a whole different situation. So just the inpatient psych unit is around an 8:30 to 4:30 to 5 situation. And if you're on call, you're on call. Having said that, guys, you're not always going to finish at 4:30, not because the workload is, sometimes the workload is a bit high, but not in a way that is too distressing, but because you could be slow. It's your first month, and I was slow multiple times, and I didn't always leave at 4:30, but I'm getting better, and here we are doing this wonderful podcast. So
right, and it's important to be slow, to ask if you don't know something, just ask questions to your upper levels, because the last thing you want to do is make a mistake, and everybody's, I think, there to help you. I think that's part of the choice that you make too. When you go into a program that you feel good about, you're gonna have a good internship, because you're gonna have people who are gonna help you. So that's important from that standpoint.
Yeah, and if you make a mistake, it's like not the end of the world. You obviously don't want to make a mistake, and you hope that your mistakes are minor. But in case you feel like you're about to do a mistake or felt that you did a mistake, I would say, I'm not talking about like very big mistakes, right? Because that will be a whole different topic of discussion where we would talk about this differently. But what I'm saying is, you have the right to have the courage that you deserve. You have the right to be courageous. And by that, I mean, you have the right to think, to ask, and also to not be afraid to make a mistake.
Great, I agree. Yeah. And so do you, now that you're an intern, like, do you work continuously, or do you have time to do other things? What's your advice about, I mean, it's very important, I think, in medicine to have a work-life balance, to have hobbies, to do other things. Do you have time to do the hobbies or the things that you like at this point?
I want to be a cautious optimist and say that I've been baking, which is not a big habit of mine. But I've come up with a few nice recipes, and I've been baking, which has been very therapeutic for me. And having said that, yes, you might have time for hobbies, and you might even find that new things are blossoming with your new discoveries. So just welcome the adventure, really.
Right, keep an open mind. Change is good, and everything new brings things that are new in you, I guess. And so what are you baking? Like, are you baking Lebanese food, or
I'm baking sweets, like which is wild. I like,
wow.
Yeah, I'm like having all these fun ideas for cookies. I made a Turkish delight Turkish coffee brown sugar cookie a few days ago.
No way.
And I kid you not. And I was like, what is this? But it tastes nice. So
can you mail us some?
I could email you the recipe.
For tasting purposes. You can check it out. Or maybe you can start tweeting about the recipes too, adding it to your Twitter feed. So what's your, so just to tell the viewers and listeners right now, so you're a good writer. I've read a lot of your tweets. So can you tell us where do you write the most? Is it on Twitter? Do you have a website? What should people follow to be able to read your poetry and your writings?
So I'm a poet and a fiction writer. I've published one work of fiction in Tendon, the Johns Hopkins Medical Humanities Journal. I have an upcoming poem there. And I've also published a few poems on iPoetry, a local poetry website. But beyond that, a lot of my fiction and poetry is right here on this beautiful laptop. I've written 2 chapbooks, and I'm working on a novella. And I have a collection of short stories. But the whole idea of becoming a better writer, it doesn't necessarily translate into more publication, but rather translate into sitting at your desk and working at your own craft. But having said that, the great news is that one of my poems is going to be published in Tendon, and that poem is part of a larger chapbook called First There Was My Country that I started writing after the revolution started. And it's a documentation of all the things we've been through since then.
Okay. Yeah, we should hopefully at some point you will publish that, and we can
That's the hope.
we can follow it. And what's your Twitter handle so people can follow you?
It's at Sarah with an H. I actually don't have it memorized. It's very funny. I'm gonna look at it right now. So it's at Sarah ELHALABI 1.
Right, and I'll actually put it on the when I publish the podcast. I'm going to put it on there too for people to be able to follow you and follow the interesting things that you write about. But I think in conclusion, I think we've discussed the matching process, we've discussed the internship process. I think the key behind all of what we talked about, especially given the fact that you're a psychiatry intern, is follow your intuition, follow your instincts, and make sure to rank the programs that you feel you will be able to fit in, and everything will be fine. I think you just have to take it step by step. Don't get overly anxious. Don't get ahead of yourself. Follow your instincts, and things should be fine.
Yeah, and it's easy to say when you're out of it. And if you're feeling anxious when you're in the match, it's totally normal. Don't be hard. Don't be anxious because you're anxious is another final piece of advice I want to say. And reach out, obviously. And I wish you all the best. So
right. Thank you, Sarah. That was a great discussion that we had.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.